Late afternoon pressed down hard as the squad slid into the last coral hollow. Ribs scraping rock glittered with shell grit and old shrapnel. Smoke from the 81s drifted low across the ridge, then thinned to reveal the black rectangle of the firing slit, sandbags crusted with salt and a dark stain ringed in white. Heat rolled off stone and lifted the smell of cordite, guano, and iron sweat to the back of the throat. 15 seconds lived between smoke puffs and whatever the slit would spit when it saw them. 15 seconds to make the last 7 yards count, and once they broke cover, there was no pulling it back. Mavers flattened in the chalky pocket and cut the air with his hand. 1 knife edge for freeze, a tight circle for smoke, 2 taps on the barman's helmet for the first rake. The map, creased like an old letter, showed a gentle rise. The ridge in front of him made pockets and funnels that ate angles. He pushed the paper deep under his blouse. Terrain, not ink, would decide. He lifted a finger. Suppress. Smoke. Move. 4 men banked on that rhythm. He banked on seconds that didn't care. Rourke blinked sweat clear and eased the M22's twin tanks into a cradle between knobby coral, careful where the hose snaked and snagged. Nitrogen hissed soft as he thumbed a test, habit more than need. The lever under his glove felt like a brass bone. Forward for fuel, back to cut. Steady, or the cone would split. Inside 15 yards, flame would roll into the slit. At 20, it would drool and die. He knew the difference the way he knew the tank's bite. He found the nozzle's mouth and fixed his head on what the tool could do if he fed it right. Yamada lay flat, hand pressed over the spare igniter pouch under his chest to keep it quiet, thumb on the dented snap like a talisman. Cheek on stone, he searched for the secondary vent, supposed to be a hand-width slice right of the main slit, angled to rake anyone not hugging dead ground. Scrub burned to black stubble hid a ditch dark enough to swallow a muzzle. He raised his hand and mimed pin-pull, short lob. Mavers nodded. Sweat crept into the cut along his thumb from crawling under a coral shelf that morning. He pushed hesitation out toward the noise. The radio's handset, a scarred block with a bent antenna wrapped in tape and palm fiber, crackled, sputtered, then died under the bar's first bark. A fallen frond had clipped the whip and kneed their line to useless. The radio man swore and aimed the stub toward the mortar haze. No correction was coming. The smoke would drift where wind and whim pleased. Mavers looked from the dead set to the slit to a sky bleaching toward evening. He carved a circle with one finger, take what you get now, and killed the hope of new rounds landing where he wanted. The bar hammered high, red tracers stitching just above the sandbag lip and chewing splinters. The light machine gun on their left drummed to thicken the rhythm. Smoke puffed gray in front of the slit, then eddied, thinner at ankle, then helmet. The lane from cover to aperture opened like a throat and would close the same way. Mavers chopped his hand. 2 breaths. Move. They went low, weight on forearms and toes, packs biting, the hose catching on a coral tooth, and then snapping free under Rourke's boot with a practiced flick. 7 yards stretched like a cliff. They had to crawl vertical. Rourke rolled onto his left hip, came up on a knee so the nozzle would thrust, not pour, and felt sweat run cold down his spine under the tank's weight. He tasted metal from breathing through his teeth. Smoke dulled the slit to a black mouth inside a darker face. He planted the nozzle on an outcrop, took 2 breaths in Mavers' cadence, closed his right glove on the lever, set his left on the trigger, felt the battery's weight in the grip like a promise. He squeezed. An animal hiss answered, and a dead click where spark should live. No orange throat shoved forward, no roll clawed for the slit. Pressurized fuel misted at the mouth and fell like rain on stone. Inside the black rectangle, a bolt slid in its guide. Rourke took a second pull as if the machine could be argued into life. Nothing. Yamada snapped the igniter cover with a nail and saw the electrodes close. pitted nubs filmed with coral dust, the gap a fragile wish chalked white. Elbow crawls and hose drag had loaded every seam with grit. He wiped with his glove, the chalk bit and held in corners only wire could reach. He jammed a thumbnail in the gap, felt grit scratch, and went to the pouch under his chest. The spare came out with a hollow ring as he bit the snap. The metal case wore a dent from bulldozing under coral earlier, a slide that saved a shin and bent his redundancy. The terminals wobbled like loose teeth. Pressed to the nozzle, the assembly wouldn't seat square. He hit the test, only a tired click and the old battery smell of failure. Redundancy turned to air in his hand. Mavers clocked the dead flame with a flick, cheek on rock, eyes on the slit, the way a man watches a door after a knock. Left hand chopping, he counted the enemy's reload with his fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let off. He knuckled the bar, raked the lip between smoke lifts, sketched arcs for frags, short, low, bounce to kiss sandbags, and roll under when smoke thinned. Timing would save them or cut them. He set his watchbone under his eye. A sea breeze tugged the smoke to lace, then nothing, and the slit stared with the certainty of a ledge. Humidity hung like a wet blanket. Every breath was a drink they didn't have. Under his helmet, Rourke's calf clenched, heat cramps sniffing for permission. He twisted a canteen with scrape-dry teeth. It dribbled onto his hand, then down the valve face where dust had scabbed. He craned to catch a mouthful and tasted metal and salt. Doc Flynn slid up along the hollow's inner face, bag scraping like a belly, and pressed his hand to Rourke's neck. Too hot. He didn't babble hydration, the man already knew. He took the valve in both hands, thumb braced, dribbled a ribbon onto a cloth patch, and wiped the threads and igniter face. Coral dust clumped to a gray paste, gauze stuck, and then took grit with it. He could hear Yamada's breath hitch. He listened for the machine gun like a medic listens to a murmur. A burst snapped where Rourke's head had been and chewed coral into chalk spit that salted his neck. The slit wasn't blind. The gunner had held for the smoke's thickest second and raked their lane on a count they now shared. Rourke flattened, tank biting his ribs, and thought fast of the obvious. If the flame didn't answer, the steel on his back would be his tomb. He blinked hard and rebuilt the world out of the next action. Yamada worked the electrodes with a rag strip and the edge of an M1 cartridge, mind narrowed to a hairline gap. The rag came back gray, the cut on his thumb split wider, blood slicking his grip until traction vanished. Salt crawled into the cut. The world went white and sharp and then small again. The dent shoved against the nozzle throat. Metal flexed and threatened to snap. He paused, balance point between fixing the thing meant to bring fire or stealing seconds for something uglier. He met Mavers' eyes. Mavers was already there. Plan shifted. Bar would blind the slit's high edge where splinters flew. The light machine gun would walk low and keep a head down. Mavers snapped twice at the grenadier. First frag short, low skip. He chopped and pointed at the seconds bleeding off the smoke. No radio correction, no fairy help. This would be their metronome. Miss it, and there'd be no second try. The secondary vent woke with a dry cough behind scrub. A skein of tracers raked the far lip of their hollow, shaving an inch they didn't have. The approach lane shrank. The ridge tightened its muscles. The thought to back out and reset left died under the math. To pull away was to give up the only dead ground in reach. They were overcommitted to this pocket. He would have to make his own cover. The grenadier yanked a pin with a clink, flattened his throw, skimmed it low. The frag skipped once, kissed the lip, and dropped out of sight. Smoke thinned enough to show a shadow roll, then hit it. He counted 4. Time stretched. He waited for the echo of a blast or the cave's cough of spite. A dull thud answered, wrong and dragged by the cave. Dust lifted off the lip. Smoke slid in and smudged the mouth a shade thicker. Yamada jammed the cleaned igniter back. Rourke lugged forward until straps sang and his hand found the lever again. He raised the nozzle like a face from water. Doc Flynn slapped tape over Yamada's split finger and inched back without losing contact with Rourke's shoulder. He had stretcher men staged one hollow back right, close enough for a scream, not for a burst. He checked his watch. The second hand crawled. He leaned his ear into the noise to catch the change that meant scream or silence. The valve face hissed under the new wet. Heat stung through Rourke's glove. He wrapped leather around the lever. Old grooves felt like luck. The slit breathed, smoke crossing and thinning. He set the angle to throw a wide fan, useful even if ignition failed, and tracers had to do it. The world narrowed to the black aperture and a millimeter of travel under his finger. He pressed. Propellant hissed. Fuel, warmed by afternoon, turned to a pale mist and hung in the span between their hollow and the mouth. For a second, the air looked like rain in stage light. Yamada's rifle cheeked up. Tracers were beads on a string in his head. Not yet, he told himself. Now, the spark should be now. Coral dust, chalk moments before, tried to be glue again in the electrode gap. The battery in the grip showed its age. Rourke squeezed with the heel of his hand. No spark. The fan drizzled on stone, gear, glove, a slick that raised the price of error. The slit darkened. A thumb would be moving a gun inside. Yamada's mouth opened for words that wouldn't help. Seconds slid like fish. Mavor's chop count beat at the back of his skull even while he looked away. He freed more powder from a cartridge to rub the contacts, a foul trick from a school you lie about later, and did it anyway. Decision made by need, not pride. Left ridge coughed, the light gun walked a low line. The bar set Mavor's count, the only music left. He saw the spare's dent and bet against it. He caught Rourke's eye. Hold a beat, then pour. He circled his palm, smoke was gone, and made a fist, opening it to mean the grenade rhythm would be theirs, not the 81's. A satchel came out of a sweat-slick pack. His mind ran ahead without losing the near. Behind, the stretcher team lay flat and counted, breaths between bursts, toe feel to the next scrape. Doc eyed the hose's abraded jacket. White lines showed where coral had chewed through the outer layer. A pinhole would become a fountain. He smoothed tape on Yamada's hand. Adhesive smelled sweet under heat and fuel. The slit blinked behind smoke, then a streak of tracers carved a bite from the rock an inch from Rourke's head. Coral dust sifted into his hair. Grit ground between his teeth. He kept his eye on the black. Motion is a target. He whispered, because words tie fingers, "Come on." The hiss made a tight cave over their heads. It didn't light. The bunker gun woke and chewed the coral lip, walking down in patient hate. Rourke held the nozzle's aim while his throat clicked, voice thin. It didn't light. Yamada's hand shot past his cheek, popped the igniter cover again, saw the same pitted story. Spare was still crooked. He made the call with a flat palm. No good. He tried to bend the ear with a knife tip. The seam flashed a hairline crack. Push more, and it would snap. He shoved the broken hope into his pouch and reached for his rifle instead, and his face told Mavers the rest. Mavers didn't waste it. Bar high left to blind. Light gun low. Grenade arcs short and skipping. All of it pegged to a count. Enemy reload, smoke thin, their own sprint. He raised 2 fingers to the ridgeline. He tapped his wrist. This was the clock now. If they were late, there was no patch. The secondary vent found them and stitched the far lip. Their shelter shrank again. Pulling back wasn't cover, it was admissions. Mavers held that thought and cut it. He opened his hand at waist level. The grenadier nodded and pulled. Frag skittered, bumped, vanished. A thud. Dust lifted. Yamada jammed the nozzle's face, cleaner hard, one more time. Rourke levered up into it, hands steadying. Doc slid back. The seconds he had were banknotes on fire. Rourke changed the angle to throw a fan that would arc in. If tracers found it, it would work without a spark. His mouth tasted cotton and blood. Propellant whispered. Fuel atomized and hung. Yamada readied the sight picture to stitch ember through mist, the way the book taught and every field day contradicted. The electrodes laughed in silence. Battery would not. Fuel glazed the stone. He saw the gun shift in shadow inside the slit and felt the day tilt. He dumped the trick and chose the dirty fix. He glanced at Mavers and circled 2 fingers. Tracer ignition. Mavers nodded once. He held up 2 to the bar, save bursts. He cut the air in a slow arc, stitch high through the curtain, light it inside their house, not ours. The hose dragged over a coral tooth. Rourke felt it bite. He kicked heel back, popped it free. A burst scythed the hose's last spot. Luck skimmed close enough to comb his hair. He took the tank out of the vent's line, moved the bulk behind a ridge tooth, and reset his body to put steel where rounds weren't crossing. Mavers palmed a satchel charge, canvas bulging with TNT blocks, a stubby fuse coiled mean. He dropped a captured Type 97 from his cargo pocket and slid it to Yamada, the only pair of hands steady enough to tie primacord under fire. The satchel wasn't to bury. Caves eat dirt. It was to punch a pressure wave, steal eyes, and buy breath for ignition. The risk was fuse length versus distance. He bet the board. Doc tilted his head at a change in the cave's tone, a catch in the gun, misfeed or reload. He flashed 2 fingers, question mark drawn in air. Mavers didn't speak it. He lifted his hand and swept down. Now. Yamada nicked the satchel's fuse short. Cap struck the Type 97 to free its pin and gave Rourke a look between dare and apology. He shoved the satchel up the lip, arm out and back like a snake, and heard the hiss of a fuse cut too close on a hot day. Mavers dropped his own frag into the mouth as punctuation. Metal clinked from inside. The defenders rolling one out on the old lesson, time to smoke. The notice ran along coral like a bell. The little egg showed itself, then disappeared, then came on. It rolled into their scrape, chipped paint, threaded cap, smoke curling. It settled by its own malice between Rourke's elbows. Delay burning somewhere inside, like a match. Rourke snapped both hands, scooped it backhand, hurled blind for the lip. It skittered and fell. The blast was a slap. Dust jumped. Coral rattled under his chest like dry rice. The cave coughed metal. The primary gunner hadn't lost breath, only waited out their gambit. Doc had no sermon for that. He pressed his shoulder over a boy who wasn't moving and taped his own knuckle one-handed. The slit's cough wrote the rest of the line. His ears found the thin music of more canteen water than men had left. Mavers leaned to Rourke's ear, voice a rasp, shift, smoke and frag on their reload. You light on tracer. No more waiting on a factory miracle. He sliced the air. The bar barked high to chew where the gun would come back into line. Yamada slammed the dented spare under his knee and tried to bend it true. The ear moved a hair. The seam brightened a sliver. One more push would break it. He let it go. He wiped the electrodes again and made the hard choice. Forget the wire. Make bullets do the work. The radio man hissed, "Smoke walk." And the handset buzzed dead. Antenna drooped a degree further. Mavers didn't waste a look. He chopped, "Freeze, count their cough, move low and dirty on that hinge." Doc hooked a boot and tugged the stretcher team a foot closer, then stopped, open ground and answer, no one would survive yet. He counted the cave's grenade cadence and heard a new cruelty. Throws held for the thin of smoke, timed for eyes rising and throats opening. The satchel thudded like a door forced inward. The mouth sucked air and lost vision. Sandbags breathed dust. Timber creaked. In that sucked-out breath, Rourke swung the nozzle and sent a fan of raw fuel into the rectangle, the mist glittering like glass dust. The light gunner saw the shimmer and laid a short burst through it, red threads tossed at a gasoline prayer. The mist ate light, then, spitefully, refused. A cough of air pushed the curtain up. Rourke leaned shoulder, changed angle, opened the lever a hair. Pressure and fate negotiated. The vent spit again. A bitter spritz laced near Mavers's cheek. He didn't flinch beyond survival and signed, "Finish." The bar held its last two bursts for the breath when tracers meant the most. Yamada breathed through his nose and lifted his rifle to throw the second match if the first failed, knowing one wrong line would light the wrong yard. The dead igniter sat like a failed charm near his elbow. He accepted the math and let his finger take the slack. Doc pulled Mavers's boot enough to remind him he had a body when a stray piece of their own satchel rattled into scrub. He watched Rourke's face change, the skin anticipating heat before mind conceded, and covered his mouth and his elbow to strain dust. Mavers counted their enemy's reload, sliced the afternoon thin. No mortar smoke now. The rear tubes were on their own schedule. He opened his mouth and closed it. He gave Rourke a single nod. The satchel's breath emptied the cave. Rourke poured fuel into the void. Yamada stitched tracers at 3 heights. The sheet swirled dumb around its edges, clung to timber. Rourke's gut fell. Then a fold took orange, broke, and ran the current. The black mouth became light. Flame drew inward, greedy, chased oxygen down the tunnel and up the right side vent. Heat rolled out like a hand. Coral popped small against the bigger sound. Vent spit a thin tongue of fire and then a thicker one. Mavers didn't celebrate. He chopped freeze. This was the price moment. Counterfire arrives when heads lift. He kept everyone pinned with one flat hand while watching for a rifle where the map had forgotten to mark an eye. Yamada fed tracers to the edge where Flame wanted to die, walking Glow back to the slit. Rourke counted seconds by the weight in his shoulders. Propellant sagged. Fuel dropped. Each breath took away a pound. A high, shredded scream came from inside the cave. Doc's hands moved to the aid bag. His head knew the crawl into heat that steals air. There was a way to pull a man in that heat and live enough to do it again. None of the ways were good. Mavers palmed a frag, then stopped. Explosions would feed what was already burning. He scooped Coral and threw a dusting at the flame's edge to shape it away from their notch. An ugly trick that sometimes worked. The machine gun's voice dulled. Metal rang low, oil boiled, wood caught. The gun sputtered. One last spit of teeth chewed only smoke. Far right, a single rifle cracked. Somewhere close, a canteen rattled because someone had forgotten to clip it. Rourke eased the lever closed in one long arc. No snap. He didn't invite flashback. His forearm shook, his thighs buzzed. He looked at the nozzle like a wounded animal that had finally stopped biting. Coral dust pasted a chalk rim on its black mouth. Yamada tapped the barrel with the back of his fingers and flinched. Hot, even through callus. He hissed, then brought his eyes back to the mouth and whispered something that might have been prayer or bile. Only then did he check Rourke's face. Mavers signaled long sweep and palmed flat to send the bar up and across the ridge above, looking for the rifle that had spoken. Victory was as narrow as the lane they'd crawled. He kept the squad's eyes from widening at the wrong time. The vent glowed dull, steady, terrible. Heat poured out smelling of timber, hair, and sandbag. Air above it shimmered. The squad held a new stillness that was exhaustion hunting for a bench. Doc knelt, tape between teeth, hands already over a calf where Coral had cut a shallow groove that looked worse than it was. Dust upgrades wounds. He listened past noise for any sound inside that meant patient versus count. Rourke's tongue was leather. His canteen felt too light. He cataloged the oversight that had stolen minutes. Wipe once and call it good. Trust a first click. Believe a tool. He put the anger in a box with others. The cost was already paid. Yamada nudged the hose coupling with his boot to shake out a coral flake before the tanks came off skin. He glanced at the dented spare igniter in his pouch, then the blackened dead one by his elbow, then the red ghosts that had lit the day. Small betrayals, small saves. Mavers called satchel teams on a net that only worked when the breeze bent wrong. His voice stayed flat. Hold until the glow drops. Wait until oxygen goes memory. He'd seen men go early and vanish under living flame. Silhouettes shrank, dust and light smeared on faces. The feeder cleared the light gun's jam and slammed the cover. The barman reached for a cool belt with burned fingers. The radio man still worked the handset as if Will straightened wire. Rourke sat. Weight slid off. The M22 lay across his lap, mouth blackened, stippled with powder. A relic warmed by a hell you make, with hands and distance between two tiny points of metal. Dusk slid sideways, slow enough to fool a man into believing he could stretch and drink and speak. North, the sea drew a dark line under dirty sky. The breeze brought salt and cooler air. Hope was a word nobody risked. The vent popped once like a coal breathed on, then steadied to dull orange. It painted the coral bacon-colored and threw elbow shadow puppets on rock. In that light, Rourke, eyes gritty, hands trembling, stared at the nozzle and didn't touch it. Touch might wake it. Mavers lifted 2 fingers and aimed them at the glowing vent, then flattened his hand for weight while the ridge exhaled heat and the men readied what came next. The bunker mouth glows dull orange against the coral as dusk settles, smoke drifting while Rourke stares at a blackened nozzle in his lap.